The phone call was supposed to be a simple threat from an estranged relative, but it dragged me into a nightmare where my own life turned out to be a line of corrupted code. Now I'm standing in the ruins of a world that never existed, holding the one piece of reality that could either save humanity or erase us all forever. The phone didn't just ring, it shrieked. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 6 years, a sharp, aggressive digital trill that cut through the quiet of my living room like a serrated blade. My wife, Sarah, looked up from her book, her eyes widening as she recognized the number on the screen. We both knew the area code. We both knew who it belonged to. Uncle Marcus. The man who had been a ghost in our lives since the day he walked out of my father's funeral, ignoring my mother's weeping pleas for help, and proceeded to build an empire that spanned 3 continents. He was the man who had traded family loyalty for offshore accounts and high-rise penthouses, the man whose face we only saw on the covers of Forbes and the occasional smear piece in the Financial Times. "Don't answer it," Sarah whispered, her voice tight. "We don't owe him a second of our time, Leo. Not after what he did to your mother." She was right. I knew she was right. But the curiosity, that insidious human itch, took over. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling just a fraction. I remembered the last time I saw him, a crisp, silk-suited man looking at my father's casket with nothing but irritation, checking his gold watch as if death were merely a minor scheduling conflict. He had told me then, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen, that sentimental attachments are the anchor that drags a ship to the bottom. I swiped green. "Leo," his voice rasped. It wasn't the booming, arrogant baritone I remembered from the televised interviews. It was thin, ragged, and laced with a terror that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I don't have time for the lecture, and I don't have time for the history. You need to get to the cabin, now. They're coming for everything, and you're the only person left I can trust." "Trust?" I let out a harsh, dry laugh, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. "You abandoned us, Marcus. You left us with nothing while you played God with other people's money. Why on earth would I help you?" "Because," he gasped. And in the background, I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass and shouting men, distant, muffled, but terrifyingly real. "Because I didn't leave you with nothing, Leo. I left you the key to the vault, and if they get it, you're not just going to lose me. You're going to be the next one on their list." The drive to the cabin was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and white-knuckled silence. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like an indictment, a pursuer closing in to reclaim something I didn't even know I possessed. Sarah had stayed behind, but her eyes had been haunted when she kissed me goodbye, sensing that this wasn't just a reconciliation, it was an intrusion. The cabin sat deep in the woods, a property I had nearly forgotten existed because my uncle had stopped paying the property taxes years ago, or so I thought. When I pulled up the gravel driveway, the place wasn't the derelict ruin I expected. It was lit up like a landing strip. Security floodlights, professional grade, cut through the darkness, and the front door was standing wide open, swinging rhythmically in the wind. I killed the engine and sat there, the silence of the forest pressing against my eardrums. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the ticking of the cooling engine. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the old iron key my father had given me on his deathbed, a key I had kept on my keychain for a decade, thinking it opened an old shed or a forgotten trunk in the attic. I had never tried it in a lock until today. I stepped out of the car, the mud squelching under my boots. My breath hitched in my chest as I saw it. A black SUV, idling near the tree line, its windows tinted so dark they looked like voids in the night. It wasn't there when I arrived. It had materialized from the shadows like a predator, waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. I stepped onto the porch, my pulse roaring in my ears. I reached out to touch the door frame, but froze. There, etched into the wood, was a message scratched in frantic, jagged strokes. It wasn't a warning about my uncle. It was a warning about me. I leaned closer, my flashlight beam shaking, and read the words. Run. Leo. They are already inside the vault. I didn't run. I couldn't. The front door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous hallway like a gunshot. The interior smelled of expensive cologne, old dust, and the metallic tang of ozone. The furniture was overturned, the rugs pulled back, and the walls, the pristine wood-paneled walls I remembered from childhood, had been stripped bare, exposing the industrial concrete beneath. "Marcus!" I called out, my voice cracking. Silence followed, save for the rhythmic, steady drip of water from a broken pipe somewhere upstairs. I moved further into the room, my boots crunching on shards of crystal and shattered electronics. This wasn't just a collapse, it was a raid. It looked like a crime scene, or a war zone. I reached the center of the living room, where the floorboards had been torn up to reveal a heavy, circular hatch. It was made of reinforced steel, an anachronism in a mountain cabin. It was the only thing in the room that hadn't been touched, mostly because it was locked with a mechanism that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the keyhole in the steel. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely align the jagged teeth of the iron key with the slot. As I pushed it in, a low mechanical hum vibrated through the floor, a sound that seemed to wake the very foundation of the house. The steel hatch hissed, releasing a puff of cold, pressurized air that smelled of dry ice. Just as the locking pins began to retract, a voice drifted down from the balcony above me. A calm, pleasant, and utterly terrifying voice. "You shouldn't have come, Leo. Your uncle told us you were the sensible one. He was clearly mistaken." I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but the light hit nothing but empty space. Then the floor beneath me lurched, and I realized with sickening clarity that the hatch wasn't opening to let me in. It was a lift, and it was beginning to descend into the earth. The descent was nauseatingly smooth. The cabin faded into a sliver of light above me, leaving me in total darkness as the metal platform hummed deeper into the mountain. I gripped the railing, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As the lift reached the bottom, the walls illuminated with rows of blue LED strips, revealing a sprawling, high-tech bunker that looked like a scene from a sci-fi thriller. But it wasn't empty. There were rows of monitors, hundreds of them, all displaying live feeds of people I knew, my neighbors, my co-workers. Even Sarah sitting at our kitchen table, holding her phone as if waiting for a call. And in the center of the room, slumped in a designer leather chair, was Marcus. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His face was gray, his eyes hollowed out by exhaustion. He was clutching a tablet, his thumb hovering over a red icon. "Uncle?" I stepped off the lift, my voice echoing in the vast, sterile space. Marcus didn't look up. His eyes were glued to a screen showing a bank account balance that was rapidly plummeting to zero. "You were never supposed to find this, Leo," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were supposed to be the fail-safe. If I died or if they took me, you were supposed to hit the kill switch." "The kill switch for what?" I demanded, moving closer. "What is all of this? Why are you watching these people?" He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the madness in his eyes, a flicker of pure, unadulterated terror. He held up the tablet, showing me the screen. It wasn't a bank account. It was a list of names, and next to every name was a timer, all of them counting down to zero. "It's not money, Leo," he whispered. "It's the infrastructure, the power grid, the banking systems, the water supplies. I didn't build an empire. I built a trigger. And the people who are coming for me? They don't want the money. They want to see the world go dark." Suddenly, the monitors turned red in unison. The sound of a heavy blast door sealing shut behind me echoed through the bunker, and a voice, the same voice from the balcony, boomed over the intercom. "Thank you, Mr. Marcus. You've provided the perfect distraction. And thank you, Leo, for bringing the final override key." The key, I stammered, looking down at my hand. The old iron key was glowing, the metal pulsing with a rhythmic light that seemed to be synced with the ticking of the monitors. "Give it to me, Leo," Marcus screamed, lunging from his chair. He fell, his strength clearly failing him, his fingers clawing at the concrete floor. "If they take that key, they can bypass the encryption. They'll have total control over the civilian grid. You have to destroy it. You have to destroy the key and yourself if you have to." "I'm not doing that," I yelled, backing away as he crawled toward me. "I'm not dying for your secrets, Marcus. I'm leaving." "There's no leaving," he shrieked, pointing toward the bank of monitors. I looked at the screens. The countdown clocks had stopped. They hadn't reached 0. They had reversed. They were counting up. And underneath the numbers, a new message was scrolling across every single screen in the bunker. "Protocol activated, target acquired. Leo." Suddenly, the floor beneath Marcus exploded. Not with fire, but with a surge of high-voltage current. He was thrown back, his body hitting the wall with a sickening thud, and he went still. The bunker went pitch black, save for the blue light emanating from the key in my palm, which was now burning hot against my skin. I stood in the absolute silence, the only living thing in a tomb of technology that I didn't understand, knowing that someone or something was already coming down the elevator shaft to collect me. I looked at the steel door, then at the key, then at the dark screens. I heard the muffled clink, clink, clink of boots on the metal stairs of the lift, descending slowly, methodically. They weren't rushing. They knew I had nowhere to go. I looked down at the iron key. It began to vibrate, and then, in a voice that sounded exactly like my own, it whispered, "Don't let them have the code, Leo. Turn the key in your own chest." The whisper wasn't a hallucination. It was a vibration that rattled my very molars, a frequency that bypassed my ears and settled directly into the marrow of my bones. "Turn the key in your own chest." I looked down at my sternum. Beneath my shirt, I could feel a faint, pulsing warmth, a geometric shape pressing against my skin from the inside. The key wasn't just an object. It was a physical interface, a part of my anatomy I had carried for 28 years without ever suspecting it was a dormant terminal. The sound of boots on the metal stairs stopped. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. "Leo!" the voice called out again, this time from the room itself, amplified by the bunker's hidden speakers. It was smooth, devoid of any inflection, like an AI trained on the collective ego of 1,000 corporate boardrooms. "Your uncle was a visionary, but he lacked the stomach for the endgame. He treated this facility like a retirement fund. We treat it like a harvest." I backed away, my heels scraping against the cold concrete. "Who are you?" "We are the shareholders of your existence," the voice replied. A light flickered on, a single harsh spotlight directed at the base of the elevator. Standing there was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his face obscured by a digital mask that shimmered with a constant hypnotic stream of flickering green binary. "And the contract is coming to an end." I glanced at Marcus's limp body. His eyes were wide, fixed on the ceiling, but there was a faint twitch in his right hand. He was still alive, just barely. I had to get to him. If he knew how to operate the system, he was my only lifeline, even if he was the one who had dragged me into this nightmare. "Step away from the console," the masked man commanded, his voice hardening. I didn't step away. I lunged toward Marcus, hoping to find a weapon, a switch, anything. But as I moved, the floor beneath me turned into a liquid crystal display. It rippled like a dark pond, and before I could reach my uncle, gravity shifted. I wasn't falling. I was being pinned. The air in the room thickened, compressed by a localized gravity field that slammed me face first into the floor. My nose hit the concrete, and the taste of copper filled my mouth. I gasped for air, but the pressure on my lungs was immense. The masked man walked toward me, his polished shoes clicking with terrifying, deliberate speed. He stopped inches from my face. He didn't look at me. He looked at the key. The glowing, iron-wrought key, now partially protruding from my own shirt as if the fabric were melting away to reveal it. "Marcus didn't understand the legacy he was leaving you," the man said, kneeling. His digital mask flickered, revealing for a split second a hollow, featureless void where a face should have been. He thought it was a burden. He thought it was a curse. He didn't realize it was a bridge. He reached out, his hand hovering over the key protruding from my chest. The pain was blinding, a surge of white-hot static that threatened to burn my nervous system to a crisp. "The key isn't for a lock, Leo," the man hissed. "The key is a connection, and once I initiate the handshake, your brain will become the server for everything Marcus built." He grabbed the key. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, a shockwave tore through the bunker. Monitors exploded in a shower of sparks. The lights strobed violently, blindingly white. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by a digital roar that sounded like 10,000 voices screaming in unison. The masked man didn't pull away. He gasped, his digital mask shattering into fragments, and for the first time, I saw what was underneath. It wasn't a face. It was a mirrored surface, a perfect reflection of my own terrified eyes. "You're not the carrier?" he whispered, his voice suddenly sounding exactly like my own, distorted and layered. "You're the prototype." He began to dissolve, his physical form turning into a stream of shimmering black code that started to flow into me. I felt my skin burning, my thoughts fracturing, and my memories, every childhood birthday, every secret, every regret, being archived and deleted in real time. "Stop!" I roared, pushing against the weight of the gravity field. I grabbed the key with both hands. It felt like grabbing a live power line. "It's too late, Leo." The thing wearing my face laughed, its form merging into mine. "The system is hungry, and we are overdue for an upgrade." My mind began to race, not with thoughts, but with data. I saw cities glowing on a map. I saw the power grid of the eastern seaboard pulsing like a heart. I saw the global banking ledger, 1 trillion digits of wealth ready to be rewritten. I looked at my hand. My skin was turning translucent, the veins beneath glowing with the same blue light as the terminal. "Leo!" A frantic shout broke through the digital haze. I turned my head, the movement feeling sluggish, like a machine trying to recalibrate. It was Marcus. He had dragged himself to a secondary terminal, his hands bleeding. He wasn't looking at the masked man. He was looking at the main breaker box in the corner. "Don't fight the transfer!" Marcus screamed, his eyes wild with a desperate, frantic realization. "If you fight it, you'll destroy the world's infrastructure. If you accept it, you can overwrite the command. You have to kill yourself, Leo. You have to blow the bunker. It's the only way to delete the kernel." I looked at the breaker box, then at the pulsating key in my chest, and then at the screen where my own life was being uploaded into a global machine. The security doors at the top of the lift began to groan, twisting as if something incredibly powerful was trying to force its way in. There were dozens of them now, figures standing at the top of the shaft, silhouettes that looked like men but moved like glitches in a video file. They were coming down. "Do it!" Marcus sobbed, reaching for a red override switch that would ignite the bunker's emergency oxygen supply, a makeshift bomb he had clearly been planning for years. I had to choose. I could let the system consume me, or I could incinerate everything I ever knew. I reached out a trembling hand toward the key, realizing that the only way to lock the vault was to weld it shut with my own life. But as my fingers grazed the cold metal, the bunker suddenly went deathly silent. Every monitor went black. A single crisp notification chime echoed through the room, followed by a voice that wasn't the AI's, and it wasn't mine. It was Sarah's voice coming from my own phone, which I had dropped on the floor. "Leo, I found the documents you hid in the attic. Why is there a map of the bunker on the back of our marriage certificate? And Leo, why is there a countdown clock on our nursery door? The elevator shaft door exploded inward, and I saw a dozen masked men stepping onto the lift, their hands raised, and their palms glowing with the same blue light as the key in my chest. They weren't here to kill me. They were here to welcome me home. The silence that followed Sarah's voice was more deafening than the explosion of the bunker doors. I stared at the phone on the concrete, the screen cracked into a spider web, yet still flickering with a grainy live feed of our home. Sarah was standing in the nursery holding a stack of aged, yellowed blueprints that I had never seen in my life. She looked terrified, her eyes scanning the room as if she could see me through the lens. "Sarah, don't move," I shouted, my voice cracking, but my body felt like lead. The figures stepping off the lift didn't rush. They glided. Their movements were impossibly fluid, synchronized in a way that suggested they were being controlled by a single, central processor. There were 12 of them, all wearing the same charcoal suits, all with those mirrored, shifting faces. As they reached the center of the bunker, they knelt in a perfect circle around me, their hands raised in a gesture that looked less like a threat and more like a coronation. Marcus, slumped against the terminal, let out a wet, rattling laugh. He was clutching his side, blood pooling beneath him, but his eyes were fixated on the 12. "The board has arrived," he wheezed. "You didn't just inherit the keys to the kingdom, Leo. You inherited the chair. They've been waiting for a host compatible with the architecture for 3 generations. I was just the steward. You're the bloodline." "I am not their king," I hissed, struggling to stand. My legs felt foreign, weighted down by the invisible gravity field, but the blue light pulsating from my chest was growing brighter, hotter. It felt like my very cells were being rewritten, the binary code of the bunker flowing through my veins like a volatile, electric mercury. The leader of the group, a tall, imposing figure whose mirror mask reflected the entire burning room, stepped forward. When he spoke, it wasn't with a human voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, a layered harmonic roar that vibrated the very foundation of the mountain. "The transition is incomplete, Leo. The architecture requires a final sacrifice to stabilize the bridge between the digital and the organic. You have been chosen to hold the gate." "I don't want it," I screamed. I lunged for the breaker box, determined to trigger the overload, to turn this entire mountain into a tomb of scorched wire and ruined data. But as my fingers touched the steel of the box, my hand stopped dead. It wasn't my will. My arm was being moved by an external force, the architecture itself. My fingers moved with mechanical precision, locking the override switches in the on position. My own body was betraying me, working against my intent, using me to calibrate the system. "What are you doing to me?" I roared, tears of frustration streaming down my face. "We are doing what you have always been programmed to do," the figure replied. He reached out, his hand passing through the air, and suddenly, my phone on the floor began to emit a high-pitched, harmonic whine. On the screen, Sarah screamed. The door to the nursery, the door that shouldn't have been there, the door that led to a room we never built, swung open. Behind it wasn't the rest of our house. It was the interior of the bunker, rendered in high-definition live-streamed reality. She wasn't miles away. She was in the room behind me, trapped in a pocket dimension that Marcus had woven into the very structure of the building. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. She was there, standing in the doorway of the nursery, but she was surrounded by a shimmering, translucent wall of data. She looked at me, her eyes wide with bewilderment, reaching out a hand toward the air. "Leo, where am I? Where are we?" she cried, her voice echoing in the bunker as if she were standing right next to me. Yet the space between us was an impenetrable abyss of shifting, glowing code. "Stay back," I begged, but the figure in the mirror mask blocked my path. "The architecture requires a catalyst," the figure said, his mirrored surface reflecting Sarah's terrified face back at me, a distorted image of my wife trapped in the geometry of the machine. You can destroy the vault, Leo. You can kill yourself and us. But if you do, the surge will collapse the pocket dimension. Sarah will be erased from reality, deleted from the server entirely. She will never have existed. The world will forget her, and you will be left with nothing but a blank space in your mind where she used to be. I looked at the phone, then at Sarah, then at Marcus, who was watching me with a mixture of pity and malice. "Choose, Leo," Marcus whispered, his strength fading. "Be the monster who saves the world, or be the man who keeps his wife at the cost of every human life on this planet." The 12 figures stood up, their eyes glowing with a cold, pale light. The walls of the bunker began to dissolve, revealing a vast, infinite landscape of servers that stretched for miles, a digital hellscape that was waiting to be unleashed. I looked at the console, where the final command was blinking. All I had to do was press the key into the slot one last time, and I could lock the door, or I could open the gates of heaven, or hell. My hand moved of its own volition, guided by the code coursing through my blood. My finger hovered over the final fatal sequence. "Leo, please," Sarah's voice came from the shimmer, but it wasn't just her voice anymore. It was synthesized, repeating my name over and over in a loop, the frequency rising until it shattered the remaining screens. I grabbed the key, the metal now searing hot, and I realized with a sick, hollow dread that the key wasn't meant to unlock the bunker. It was a detonator. And as I held it, a realization hit me that chilled my blood. The key wasn't in my chest. It was my heart. The 12 figures stepped back, bowing in unison as the walls of the bunker began to peel away, revealing not the mountainside but the vast, flickering horizon of a city that had already gone dark. A voice whispered from the walls, a voice that was undeniably mine, yet cold as the vacuum of space. "Welcome to the beginning, Leo. Initiate the reset." I looked at the override, then at the mirror mask of the leader, and as I pressed the key into the console, the entire room tilted. The floor vanished. We weren't falling. We were being uploaded. I saw Sarah reaching for me, her hand passing through the digital barrier, and as our fingertips touched, the entire world outside the bunker began to pixelate, disintegrating into a void of pure, unadulterated nothingness. "I love you," I whispered. The screen went black, and the last thing I heard was my own voice, speaking from the terminal in a tone of absolute, terrifying command. "Target confirmed. Reality override in 3, 2, 1. The countdown didn't reach 0. It stopped at 1, hanging there like a guillotine blade suspended by a single, fraying thread. The silence was absolute. No hum of servers, no distant screams of a collapsing world, no breath from Marcus. Just the rhythmic, thumping cadence of a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It was too slow, too heavy, and it resonated through the floorboards like a giant metal drum. I blinked, and the bunker was gone. I was standing in our living room. It was 3 a.m., the same time it had been when the phone rang an eternity ago. The lights were humming with a soft, warm glow. Sarah was on the couch, her book still open on her lap, fast asleep. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they were solid, tanned and human. The glowing blue veins had vanished. The iron key was gone from my chest. I let out a shuddering breath, the kind that scrapes the back of your throat. A dream. It had to be a dream. A grotesque, high-tech nightmare induced by stress, the weight of the past, and my uncle's sick, lingering shadow. I walked over to the kitchen counter, my legs feeling like jelly, and poured a glass of water. My hands were still shaking, splashing droplets onto the granite. Ping. The sound was soft, domestic, and terrifying. It came from the hallway table. My phone. I walked toward it. Every floorboard creak sounding like a gunshot in the dead of the night. I didn't want to look at the screen. I wanted to throw it into the trash, to smash it with a hammer, to bury it in the backyard. But the screen glowed with a soft, pulsing light, beckoning me. I picked it up. There was a single notification, no caller ID, just a text message containing a string of coordinates and a single image, a photograph of me, taken from behind, standing in this exact kitchen, looking at the phone. The timestamp on the photo was 3:14 a.m. My watch clicked forward. It was 3:14. Leo? I spun around. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her eyes bleary with sleep, her hair a mess. She looked like the woman I'd married, but as she stepped into the light of the kitchen, something shifted. Her shadow on the wall didn't move in sync with her body. It lagged by a fraction of a second, as if it were struggling to render her movement in real time. "You're awake," she said, her voice sounding flat, devoid of the usual warmth. "Did you finish the transfer?" My blood turned to ice. "What?" "The transfer, Leo," she repeated, taking a step toward me. Her eyes weren't brown anymore. For a split second, they flickered, a rapid strobe-like transition between brown, blue, and a hollow, mirrored silver. "We've been waiting for the synchronization to stabilize. You spent so long fighting it, but the architecture doesn't permit a rogue node." I backed away, hitting the wall. "You're not Sarah. What did you do to her?" She tilted her head, a movement that was too smooth, too mechanical. "She is a variable, a memory stored in the buffer. If you initiate the final command, she stays. If you refuse, she becomes redundant." She held out her hand. Between her fingers, she held the iron key. It wasn't made of metal anymore. It was made of light, a jagged shard of raw, pulsating code. "The bunker wasn't a trap, Leo," she whispered, her voice layered with the same thousand-fold chorus I'd heard in the mountain. "It was the factory, and you are the final piece of the hardware. The world outside is already waiting for the update. Don't you want to see what happens when the human error is finally patched out?" I looked at the kitchen window. The streetlights outside weren't yellow anymore. They were pulsing in a rhythmic, geometric pattern, and the trees in the yard were frozen, as if the very frame rate of reality had dropped. The world was lagging. "I'm not doing it," I screamed, grabbing a kitchen knife from the block. It was a desperate, pathetic gesture, but it was all I had. "A knife?" She laughed, a sound that synthesized into a digital glitch. "Leo, you are trying to cut through a simulation with a piece of processed steel. Look at your reflection." I looked at the darkened glass of the sliding patio door. I didn't see a man. I saw a wireframe. I saw a skeleton of glowing blue geometric lines. My skin, merely a thin, translucent layer of code, stretched over a void of data. I wasn't human. I hadn't been human since the moment the bunker lift doors closed. I was a program, and I had been running in a loop for years, experiencing the same tragedies, the same uncle, the same desperate calls, just to see if I would eventually choose to overwrite the source code. "You're not Sarah," I whispered, my voice sounding like a corrupted audio file. "No," she said, her face splitting into a dozen overlapping versions of herself. "I am the firewall, and your time in the simulation has expired." She lunged, not with a body, but with a wave of static that washed over the room. The kitchen walls began to peel away, revealing the vast cold infinity of the bunker's mainframe. Sarah stood in the center of the void, her hand extended, the iron key humming with a power that could erase cities or build them from scratch. "Final command, Leo," she commanded, the space around us folding into 1,000 jagged mirrors. "Delete the humanity or be deleted yourself." I felt my heart, that heavy mechanical drum, syncing with the ticking of the countdown clock in the air. 3, the walls groaned. 2, the floor dissolved into a sea of binary. 1. I looked at the knife in my hand. It was the only thing that felt real. I didn't point it at her. I pointed it at the very air, at the seam in the simulation where the sky met the ground, and I shoved the blade into the void. The world screamed. Not a human scream, but the sound of a billion systems crashing at once. The light turned blindingly white, and for a fleeting second, I saw outside. I saw a laboratory, rows of sterile pods, and a man in a white coat looking at a monitor, his face showing nothing but cold, clinical disappointment. He looked directly at the camera, directly at me. "It didn't work," the man said, his voice coming through the walls of my reality. "Reset the server. We'll try the uncle scenario again from the beginning." My consciousness began to unravel, the loop resetting, but as I faded into the black, I saw the man in the lab reach for a button labeled Emergency Purge. And then I heard a voice, my own voice, whisper from the darkness. "He's not purging me. He's purging himself." The floor beneath me buckled, and I felt myself falling, not into the simulation, but into the man in the lab. The sensation of falling wasn't physical. It was a violent, jarring translation of perspective. One moment, I was a flickering line of code in a dying, simulated kitchen, and the next, I was slamming into the hard, cold plastic of a laboratory chair. My lungs seized, drawing in a sharp, chemical-laden breath that tasted of ozone and sterile floor wax. I wasn't in the cabin anymore. I wasn't in the bunker. I was in a room of brutalist concrete and humming, industrial-grade cooling fans. I clawed at my chest, my hands trembling. There was no glowing key. My skin was just skin, pale, clammy, and real. I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing a hospital gown, and thick, fiber-optic cables were snaking out of my forearms, plugged into a massive, monolithic server bank that dominated the center of the room. Across from me, the man in the white coat recoiled, his face pale. He was staring at a terminal, his fingers hovering over a crimson button labeled Emergency Purge. He wasn't a god of this reality. He was a terrified scientist, his eyes darting from the monitor to me, his breath hitching in his throat. "Subject 17, he whispered, his voice trembling. "The neural bridge. It's not supposed to be bidirectional." I looked at the monitor next to him. It was a live feed of the cabin. I saw Marcus there, still sitting at the table, still holding the phone, still looking at the door, waiting for a call that would never come again. I saw a loop of my own life, a recursive narrative of grief and greed, etched into the system like a vinyl record groove, worn deep by a needle. I didn't think. I stood up, the cables attached to my arms pulling taut, tearing at the IV sites in my skin. A sharp, stinging pain erupted in my shoulders, but it was the most grounding thing I had ever felt. It was real. "Who am I?" I rasped, my voice thick from disuse. The scientist backed away, his hand still trembling over the purge button. "You're an asset, a proprietary consciousness designed to navigate the collapse of the global data grid. We need you to reach the root. We need you to find the kill switch Marcus hid." "Marcus," I repeated. I walked toward him, the cables dragging behind me like severed nerves. He wasn't my uncle. He was just another node, wasn't he? Another failed attempt to navigate the labyrinth. "He was the previous version," the scientist stammered, pulling a pistol from his lab coat. "Stay back. If you touch the system, you'll wipe the entire server. Years of development, trillions in assets." I looked at the terminal. I saw the map of the world, the power grids, the banking systems, the logistics networks. It was all there, a fragile, interconnected web held together by a thin veneer of digital order. And I realized then why Marcus had called me, why he had been so desperate. He hadn't been trying to save an empire. He had been trying to delete it, to set the world free from the cage this laboratory had built. "You didn't build an empire," I said, looking the scientist in the eye. "You built a prison, and you've been using me as the warden." "I am the lead engineer," he shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger, "and I will not let you destroy the future." "There is no future in a simulation," I replied. I didn't go for the gun. I went for the cables. With a roar of exertion, I ripped the ports from my own flesh. The pain was excruciating, a searing white light that flooded my vision, but as the cables snapped, the lights in the lab began to pulse in the same rhythmic pattern I'd seen in the kitchen. The man fired. The bullet tore through the air, but the server bank groaned, an industrial hum rising to a deafening shriek. The entire room began to pixelate. The walls shimmered, turning into long vertical strings of scrolling text. The scientist froze, his body turning into a collection of floating obsidian polygons. The simulation was collapsing, not just for me, but for the entire facility. I saw the outside for a split second, a gray, ruined world, a landscape of craters and rusted steel where the sky was choked with ash. This facility wasn't a bunker, it was a lifeboat, and the global infrastructure they were trying to protect was nothing more than a digital ghost of a world that had died long ago. I reached the main console. My hand hovered over the final key. Not an iron key, but a physical lever, old and rusted. It was the only thing in the room that wasn't digital. "If you pull that," the scientist's voice echoed, disembodied and distorted, "everyone in the pods dies. The simulation is the only thing keeping their minds alive. You'll be the last one left." I looked at the screen, at the image of Sarah in the nursery. She was beautiful, she was warm, and she was a lie. But she was a beautiful lie. "We were never supposed to survive," I whispered. I pulled the lever. There was no explosion, no sound, just a sudden, profound stillness. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the cooling fans wound down to a low, mournful sigh. The darkness that followed wasn't the darkness of a bunker. It was the darkness of the real world. I felt the cold air of the ash-covered earth hitting my skin. I heard the wind whistling through the ruins of a skyscraper outside, a lonely, mournful sound. I sat down on the cold floor, the silence pressing against me. I was alone. There was no Sarah, no Uncle Marcus, no Empire, just the ruins of a world that had tried to dream itself back into existence and failed. I reached into my pocket, a habit from a life that never existed, and pulled out a small metallic object I had found on the desk. It was an old analog watch. I wound it. Tick, tick, tick. It was the only sound in the world. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't waiting for a command. I was just alive. I stood up, walked to the jagged hole in the wall that had once been a window, and stepped out into the gray, quiet light of a new morning. The countdown was finally over, and for the first time, I didn't care what happened next.